This video will show Governor Charlie Baker calling out President Trump for his appalling and outrageous refusal to commit to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. You'll hear Kayleigh McEnany's lame excuses for Trump's refusal, and a response not only from Mitch McConnell, but from the entire Senate. Yes, every single senator. All of that's coming up in this video.
Mr. President, real quickly, win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? There has been rioting in Louisville. There's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it, and you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
Mr. President, the second question is, will you...
Please, go ahead.
Why won't
you asked the question.
Kayleigh, I wonder if you can just clean up or clarify something the president said yesterday. If he loses this election, can you assure us that there will be a peaceful transfer of power?
You are referring to the question asked by the Playboy reporter, right?
I'm referring to the president being asked if there would be a peaceful transfer of power, and he did not say yes.
Yeah,
so
I believe.
I'm asking you, will there be a peaceful transfer of power if he loses this election?
I believe that question asked by the Playboy Power. In fact, I think I have it.
The press secretary should be responding to a serious question about the president's refusal to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. Yet she's deflecting to the fact that the reporter works for Playboy. Trump's been on the cover of Playboy and has been interviewed twice by the magazine. She says other stupid things in that press conference, which we'll continue with later in this video. Right now, I want to emphasize just how serious this issue is by showing you what Republican Governor Charlie Baker had to say.
I voted mail in the primary. It was what I would describe here in Massachusetts, pretty similar to the way mail-in ballots work in most states, which is it's basically absentee balloting on steroids. And part of the reason we put that program in place in Massachusetts was because we weren't really sure where COVID was going to be for the primary or the general election, and we wanted to make sure people who were concerned about going to polling places would have an option. And it worked just fine. The same way it worked just fine across the rest of the country. Now, we've been through some really difficult periods of time and points of transition in our nation's history. How about Abraham Lincoln, who got 39% of the popular vote and 52% of the electoral vote? But that electoral college had to actually show up and vote based on the vote that took place in their states for him to be elected president, because he got the majority of the electoral vote and a plurality of the popular vote. He got more popular votes than anybody else, but he didn't get to 51. And there was tremendous concern because of the fact that our country at that point in time was basically unraveling, that the Electoral College wouldn't stand up and do what they were supposed to do and vote on behalf of the people who had actually won the presidential election in their state. And they did. Immediately, on the day that they were asked to do it. A huge part of this nation's glory, to the extent it exists as a beacon to others, is the peaceful transfer of power based on the vote of the people of this country. Mail-in balloting has been with us forever. And that peaceful transfer of power is what the people of this country rely on when they go to vote. It is appalling and outrageous that anyone would suggest for a minute that if they lose an election, they're not going to leave, period. And I know that I speak, I am sure, for the vast majority of the elected officials in the United States of America when I say that. And that's where I think a big piece of the voice, whatever happens on Election Day, will come from. How many times at the end of an election have we heard the words, "the people have spoken"? Now, we all spent that primary being very excited about the size of the turnout we had here in Massachusetts. Record-setting turnout in our primary. That's a good thing. And I said at the time when I got asked about it, people think there's a lot at stake in this election. And there is. Whichever state you're from, region you're from, or where you're voting up and down the ticket. So one way or another, the people are going to speak in November, up and down the ticket for all those races that are out there. And those of us who serve in public life will do everything we can to make sure that the people's will is followed through and executed on. Because that is fundamentally why there's a United States of America in the first place.
Okay, so I've got to ask you about the president's question and answer yesterday at a press briefing when he was asked whether he would peacefully transfer power if he were not to be reelected president. There was a lot of back and forth there. The Atlantic writing this: if the vote is close, Donald Trump could easily throw the election into chaos and subvert the result. Who will stop him? What's your reaction to this conversation?
Look, we've had an orderly transfer of power every 4 years since Washington was selected for a second term in 1792. That will happen again to the winner of the November 3rd election on January the 20th, 2021.
In response to Trump, the Senate passed a resolution reaffirming its support for a peaceful transition of power. And it passed by unanimous consent. No senator objected to it. They should have done more than pass a resolution. They should have impeached him.
Mr. President, it's a shame that we have to come and reaffirm our commitment to our country, to our Constitution, and who we are as a people, and how we became the great country, the greatest country on earth, the freedoms that we all take for granted many, many times. And sometimes we hear things that challenges that, and we heard that yesterday, and we were very concerned about that. And as of today, my friend and colleague from Indiana, Senator Braun, basically wanted to reaffirm our commitment to the Pledge of Allegiance, which is something that we should do every day, our Pledge of Allegiance to our flag, our great country. What we're doing with this resolution is saying that basically the bedrock of democracy is the orderly and peaceful transfer of power when the president transitions out. There should not be a question. There should not ever be one iota of interruption whatsoever as that peaceful demonstration. I remember 1960, the race between, at that time, Senator John Kennedy and Vice President Richard Nixon. Very, very close. Everybody was on pins and needles. But there was an orderly transfer. Richard Nixon conceded, and rather than take this out further, he did a peaceful, orderly transfer, and away we went. And then you had Al Gore and Vice President Al Gore, the former Vice President, and George W. Bush in 2000. And we know how that turned out with the Chads and all the hanging Chads and all the consternation, not knowing for so long. And then basically, for the sake of our country, did the right thing. And again, we expect that to be done. We're in the most difficult times right now. And for the president to address the subject of maybe not knowing if he would accept or not is beyond all of our comprehension that could ever happen in America. Could ever happen, ever be discourse. The will of the voters, the verification of the votes, and being able to protect the ballot box. We have come through a lot in our country, and we continue to be challenged. But I believe to have the leader of the free world talk as if we're an autocracy, authoritarian versus a democracy, is something that alarmed me and alarmed a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Even those quiet as some may be, I know they're alarmed. And with that, what we did is reaffirm who we are in the Senate and what we believe in. And the resolution is very clear. All it says is we reaffirm as the Senate our commitment to the orderly and peaceful transfer of power called for in the Constitution of the United States, and intends that there should be no disruptions by the President or any person in power to overturn the will of the people of the United States. It's really who we are. It's what you defended. It's what you fought for. It's why you entered the service. And I'm so proud of all the people that have served. Thank you for your service, Mr. President. And thank you to all the people in West Virginia, the most patriotic people in the world. I've said this so many times. I'm so proud of my state. We have more veterans per capita than most any state. shed more blood, lost more lives for the cause of freedom than most any state. Never failed to answer the call. We've even done the heavy lifting. Our people have worked hard, including my grandfather and all my relatives, and we've mined the coal that made the steel that built the guns and ships and the factories that defended our country and built our great nation. We're very proud of all that. This is not who we are. This is not who we are. And we must speak loudly. This is not politics. This is not Republican or Democrat. Make no mistake. This is basically, if you believe, for the sake of the good Lord and all we believe in our country, this is about maintaining this democracy. That's all it's about, maintaining. And we will defend that. And we have today just reaffirmed our commitment to the orderly transition of power by the President of the United States, whoever that should be, whenever that might happen, that they must have an orderly transfer that we all will defend and uphold. So that's what we reaffirm today. And I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity, and I thank all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for basically standing true to who we are and what we believe in and what we have committed ourselves to.
Right here, he was asked when, lose, or draw whether he would accept the transfer of power. I'm not entirely sure if he won, why he would accept a transfer of power. That is maybe the deranged wish of that reporter, but that's not how governing works.
Very direct and very simple question. If the president loses this election, will this White House, will this president assure us that there will be a peaceful transfer of power? It's a very simple question.
The president will accept the results of a free and fair election. But I think that your question is more fitting to be asked of Democrats who have already been on the record saying they won't accept the results of an election. In fact, I have several of them here for you. South Carolina Democrat Jim Clyburn has said that Trump is not going to win fairly. Senator Barbara Boxer has said that the only way Trump will win is to steal it. That's according to Democrat Senator Barbara Boxer. The Washington Post has noted, they have a headline, Democrats may not trust the results of the election if Trump wins. And then you have that beautiful quote from Hillary Clinton that Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstance. So I think your fitting is a fitting question for Democrats. Yes.
Kayleigh, just to understand this clearly, are the results legitimate only if the president wins?
The president will accept the results of a free and fair election. He will accept the will of the American people.
So for clarity, if he loses and it's free and fair, he will accept it.
I've answered your question. He will accept the results of a free and fair election. Peter.
In fact, one of the aides just said that the
Ben,
president was his own spokesperson, which is why I asked. But go ahead.
So Kayleigh, yesterday when the president said, get rid of the ballots, there won't be a transfer, frankly, there'll be a continuation. Which particular ballots is he talking about wanting to get rid of, and why does he think that would help him get elected?
The president wants to get rid of mass mail-out voting, and that's not because he said clearly that could go either way. It could damage either candidate's chances because it's a system that's subject to fraud. In fact, in the last 24 hours, police in Greenville, Wisconsin, found mail in a ditch, and it included absentee ballots. And also, I can confirm for you that Trump ballots for the president were found in Pennsylvania, and I believe you should be getting more information on that shortly. Here in the last 24 hours, they were found cast aside.
So why in the past hour did the president tweet out, vote by mail ballots in my home state of Florida begin going out today? Make sure to request yours, fill it out, and send it in.
The president has always made the distinction that absentee ballots, where you go through a process where you request a ballot and you mail that in, that is a system that works. But a system where you mass mail out to voter rolls, which are not kept and maintained, where in Los Angeles County, for instance, you have 120% of the county enrolled, that system is untenable. It doesn't work. It leads to what we saw in Nevada, where there were ballots languishing in trash cans and pinned to apartment boards.
Okay, and finally, today FBI Director Wray testified on the Hill that he has not seen historically any kind of coordinated national voter fraud effort in a major election, whether it's by mail or otherwise. So if the president's own FBI director says this isn't a problem, why does the president keep saying it is?
Well, as Attorney General Barr has said, we've never had an election where we've done mass mail-out voting like this before. I would point you to a bipartisan study done by none other than Jimmy Carter, who said that these mail-in votes remain the largest source of potential fraud. And he even cited an example of a 1997 Miami mayor election that resulted in 36 arrests for absentee ballot fraud. That election had to be rerun and the results were reversed. That is an example from 1997, but there are many others like Patterson, New Jersey, where 4 men were charged with voting fraud recently. 4 more men were charged in California, and there's a ton of examples. I could get you an encyclopedia of fraudulent examples we've had.
These ballots are going out. If the president does win, will he still think it was rigged and fraudulent?
I've already answered this question 3. Yes.
Thank you, Kayleigh. I wanted to go back to mail-in voting for just a bit. Right now, 5 states conduct elections entirely by mail-in prior to the pandemic with no cases or no major cases of fraud. Does that success not give the president's confidence in mail-in voting?
So those states have had time and a history of doing having a workable system, and one that has been done for many years, for many election cycles, to move the entire country to mass mail-in voting all at once and have an entirely new system, and do that in just a few short months is an untenable and an unworkable proposition, and one that has shown to not work well at all, especially when you look at the disenfranchisement, which I think is really troubling when it comes to mass mail-in voting. In 2016, you had 1% of ballots thrown out, absentee ballots, that amounted to 319,000 votes thrown out. And if you have the entirety of the country voting by mail, you can imagine that number would be many folds higher than that. And you look just in the primary, where you've seen states try to move to this mass mail-in system. There were 100,000 ballots rejected in California. In New York City, 1 in 5 mail-in ballots were rejected. And as a former DOJ voting rights official said, it's nuts. That is just way too high when 1 in 5 voters, because of mass mail-in voting, have their ballots thrown out.